urge every Indian to go vote.
All right, we are turning our attention now towards our neighbor, Pakistan. Pakistan's $7 billion IMF Lifeline is now hanging by a thread. In a dramatic escalation, the International Monetary Fund has just slapped Islamabad with 11 brand new structural conditions, pushing the total number of IMF regulations to a staggering 64. From forcing top bureaucrats to publicly declare their assets online, to dismantling decades-old elite capture in the sugar industry, and also threatening a mini budget if tax targets are missed. These are some of the toughest demands Pakistan has ever faced from the fund. Let's in fact break down what exactly these 11 new conditions are and take you through these conditions, because remember that in a span of 18 months, there are around 64 conditions that have been slapped on Pakistan. Now let's look at this new 11 conditions that have been set out for the bailout program. Number one is corruption. Now it's deeply entrenched in the Pakistan economy. Date is by October 2026. What Pakistan needs to do is Islamabad has to release an action plan to tackle corruption risk in 10 departments. So they have highlighted 10 departments. It needs an action plan by October 2026, and they need to make sure that there is no corruption in those 10 departments. The second department is cross-border payments. It's very important. Cross-border payments is something that everyone is looking at, and by May 2026, that is the deadline that Pakistan has got from IMF. The action plan to review the cost of foreign remittances and structural barriers affecting cross-border payments. So currently in the system, there are structural barriers, and Pakistan needs to make sure that by May next year, these are all removed. The third condition is the bond market. The date or the deadline that has been set is September 2026. It needs to examine obstacles limiting development of local currency bond market and publish strategic plan. So whatever is limiting the development of the local bond market, it needs to make sure that all these hurdles are removed, and it needs to have a strategic plan in place. Now one of the biggest conditions is the sugar industry. Now remember that by June 2026, Pakistan needs to make sure that the federal and provincial administrations agree on national sugar market liberalization policy. So they do not have a national sugar policy, and they need to make sure that they do have it by that deadline that has been set by the IMF. The fifth one is tackling FBR's poor efficiency, and this deadline is December end 2025. So this is more immediate. They need to do it by December end this year. Government to complete a reform roadmap that outlines priority areas, staffing needs, timelines, milestones, expected revenues, outcomes and KPIs. So it needs to make sure that all of these areas are covered by December end. That's an immediate condition. Next comes tax reforms that the country also needs to do by December 2026 next year. So it's got 1 year to bringing tax reforms, a medium-term tax reform strategy, stretching out a phased plan to cover tax policy. So it needs to make sure that by next year in December, it has a tax reform policy in place. Number 7 is the mini budget for revenue shortfalls, and by end of December 2025. So this is immediate as well. Pakistan needs to make sure that if tax revenue gets missed, government has to introduce a mini budget. So if you miss those tax revenues, you need to make sure that you have a mini tax budget in place. So those are some very important conditions that have in fact been put in place by the IMF. And remember that Pakistan has been in fact looking at this loan from the International Monetary Fund, and now the International Monetary Fund has put in place 11 new conditions. They are dealing with a host of issues. They are also looking at forcing the top bureaucrats in the country to in fact publicly declare what their assets are, because that's something that everyone is looking at. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Joining us on the broadcast is Ambassador Suresh Kumar Goyal, former diplomat, to take this discussion forward. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. So when we are looking at this entire issue, these new 11 conditions that have been introduced by the IMF take the total number of conditions to 64 in a span of 18 months against Pakistan, which is looking at a bailout package, sir. How do you look at these 11 conditions? They deal with corruption, they deal with people actually, the bureaucrats who have to be forced to declare their assets publicly, sir.
Shivani, these are all very good conditions and very relevant in the case of Pakistan. And as you said, that these are 11 new conditions, but there were conditions which existed even earlier. And the total number of conditions has now gone up to 64 in all for the release of IMF bailout package. At the same time, if you remember, I think less than 1 year ago, IMF released 1.8 billion of the $7 billion package to Pakistan, even though not many of the conditions, earlier conditions had been met. And therefore, even if the new conditions are not met, I do not know whether IMF will actually not release the bailout package to Pakistan, because there is a lot of political pressure which would be coming on IMF. One of them will be the USA, which is developing good nexus, good relations with Pakistan now. Remember about the rare earth. And therefore, while the conditions are good, I do hope that IMF will actually stay with these conditions and insist on Pakistan meeting these conditions before releasing the other remaining package.
Sir, absolutely, because we are also seeing deadlines, sir, that has been given by the IMF to Pakistan. They need to make sure that they follow the deadlines. Also,
I hope they do.
Yes, sir, and also important topics like corruption is also spoken about by the IMF. They believe that it is entrenched in the country. They need tax reforms. They need mini budgets if they do not meet the revenue goals. So how do you look at that, sir?
Shivani, all these are very important conditions. Corruption, tax reforms, everything. They have also extended the deadlines for Pakistan to meet these conditions. And they have also said that if they cannot meet the conditions, they can release a mini budget. So all kinds of concessions are made to Pakistan despite these very strict conditions. And therefore, I am very, very doubtful. I am very, very doubtful that Pakistan will actually, or IMF will actually not give the package to Pakistan even if the conditions are not met. There are lots of ifs and buts here.
All right.
Yes. All right.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on the broadcast and giving us that valuable perspective into the issue. We are turning our attention